Okay, so let's get started. So we're continuing this discourse, knowledge and faith, comparing and contrasting, exploring the differences between how knowledge fits into our relationship with God and our maybe the how we incorporate it into how we see the world and our purpose in the world versus faith and where faith fits in. And in last week's deal, so just to give a brief recap, last week we asked a series of questions, and we mentioned as well that while we're asking a series of questions, they're not to necessarily be answered immediately. And so they're questions that we're going to sit with and that we're maybe going to come back to. So we asked about this idea of knowledge, this emphasis on knowledge, where our verse here, which is in reference to the giving of the Torah, we're on page 3, just to begin the recap. So our verse here, that you shall know today and you shall take it to heart, that God is God in the heavens above and the earth below. There is nothing else. So we said this emphasis on knowledge seems to be superfluous, seems to be maybe redundant because of a previous verse that we already stated earlier, that you have shown in order that we should know. So the showing or the knowing there via the showing should have been sufficient. And why are we emphasizing again this knowledge deal? What is the deal with knowledge? We mentioned in our conversation last week that knowledge has a number of connotations, one of which being about connection. We mentioned a number of different deals. So then we asked another question of the experience that the Jewish people had at Mount Sinai, and recognizing or incorporating into that the fact that each one of us had an experience of being at Sinai, right? We all had some element of that Sinaitic moment, that our souls in some spiritual dimension were all present there. And so in that case, how do we align that with this knowledge, and how do we incorporate that into our experience? We said Zeis HaMitzvah. We said that the concept of knowledge that is being emphasized here in this verse is connected with the experience of saying the Shema, right? That the Shema is a meditative experience. The Shema is a contemplative act that engages and activates our knowledge and our consciousness to godliness, right? To say Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, right? Shema we brought the verse from Isaiah at some point, where we said Shema is connected with Su'u Marim Einechem. Su'u, elevate, lift up, Marim, to the heavens, your eyes, Einechem, and that each word begins with the letter Shin, Mem, Ayin, which spells out Shema, that the Shema is the process of elevating our consciousness, is the meditation to elevate our consciousness. So being that there is this specific focus on saying the Shema, and that the experience of meditating and reflecting on godliness and the singularity of godliness as it is intertwined with what we perceive to be this world that is full of independent existences. So the Shema is something that is always active, is always part of our experience, right? And this verse would seem to indicate that the Shema is something that is connected with the land of Israel. So that was another one of our questions. On page 5, we summarize the questions. The first is, why do we need to know that Hashem is the one and only God if we were already shown this at the giving of the Torah? 2, what does it mean you should know today, right? Why today? Why is the emphasis on today? 3, why is the recital of the Shema the first mitzvah that Moshe Rabbeinu commands us to fulfill in the land of Israel? What connection does saying the Shema have with the land of Israel? Right. So those are our 3 questions that we sort of begun this conversation with, and we said to understand all of this, we need to ask another question, and that question is really the crux of what we're going to talk about over these coming weeks, which is the relationship and the difference between knowing das and emunah, believing. And then we did a deep dive into knowledge. We looked at knowledge in contrast to faith. We said that we have 2 verses, right? We have Das Elokei Avicha, which is a verse from Chronicles. On page 6, he brings it, a verse from Chronicles that says, "Know the God of your fathers," or of your fathers, plural, and that Das, this knowledge experience, is about grasping and comprehension. And then it says, as we just celebrated last week with the end of Passover, the splitting of the sea, it says regarding that experience, "V'aminu b'Hashem u'b'Moshe Avdei," that they believed in God and in Moses, his servant. So we looked at how to relate to the world around us. And we said that our meditation or our reflection in perceiving this physical world is not one that requires us to have belief, but we see that this world we see that it is obvious to us that this world was created and that there is godliness that vitalizes the world at every moment, that creation was not a stagnant event that happened 6,000 years ago, but creation is an ongoing process that exists at every moment, and God is constantly creating and sustaining all of existence, and that when we are able to dial into that comprehension and that recognition, so then it's clear to us that as we perceive it as if we know it as if we see it with our physical eyes, was the way that Alter Rebbe framed it. It becomes so real to us to live, to inhabit that reality and to inhabit that mindset that the world is full of godliness and that everything is being created at every moment, so that it becomes like a knowledge, like something we know, like something we actively perceive and see. And so therefore we said, when it comes to the creation of the world, the creation of existence, the source of existence, it is something that is not under the realm of faith, right? We don't need faith to believe that this world is constantly created by godliness, constantly imbued with godliness and manifesting godliness, but rather this is something that falls under the realm of knowledge. And that brought us to the end, onto page 8. And we said that das, the terminology of knowledge, has a number of connotations, including recognition and awareness, and also hamakas alev, and also thinking deeply into a matter, that it is something that is at the forefront of our consciousness, something that we engage in often or constantly. It is an awareness that we live with. And so the knowledge of this world being manifesting godliness is something that is not sort of like a cursory reflection, but it's something that we're constantly living with. We elevate the experience of meditation, of saying the Shema, and of integrating this, is to elevate our moment-to-moment experience, that every moment is attuned to perceiving godliness, to knowing that the singularity underlies whatever multiplicity we might perceive in this physical world. Right? It allows us to shift our perspective. Masha Einkein, right? What he says, it's not a hirur ba'alma, it's not just a superficial or occasional reflection, because that would not be as significant. And then we have the summary on page 9. The mimer, we'll just read this just so we're all holding in the same place. The mimer, the discourse, asks a few questions on the verse, and you shall know today and take to heart that Hashem is the God on heaven above and on earth below. There is nothing else, right? And we mentioned in passing that this concept of there is nothing else, ein od milvado, is a core tenet in Hasidic thought and in Jewish mysticism in general. To say not only are we saying that there is no other gods, but we're saying really the Torah is telling us that nothing exists, that nothing besides, everything is a manifestation of godliness, and that nothing has any independent existence, so separate existence, individuated existence, and that everything in this world, be it the table or the chair or the bricks, is all infused with godliness and a representation, a manifestation of godliness in some finite physical form that is being constantly sustained at every moment. So the Rebbe explains the difference between the two mitzvahs of knowing and believing, the two modalities in which we relate to God, through knowing and through believing, right? We mentioned last week that mitzvahs are not commandments as much as they are connection points or opportunities for connections, modalities in our connection. We can understand knowing about Hashem from the analogy of knowing that there's a soul that enlivens the body, right? That was the essence, that was the core metaphor that we gave. That just like we see very starkly that when the life force leaves a body, when the soul leaves a body, we see that all that remains is a corpse, and it is clearly inanimate, or at least unvitalized, right? Lacking vitality. And that metaphor helps us understand a similar degree to which godliness is infused within this physical world to create this physical world, for us to deduce and know that there is a creator and a source to physical existence. So too, we can know that Hashem is creating and enlivening everything. The mitzvah of knowing Hashem is only when one truly applies oneself to the disciplined practice of thinking deeply about Hashem, right? And this was something that we mentioned last week, which is, in general, faith, I think, gets a bad rap and has a lot of difficult connotations for us to understand. And we usually connote faith with blind faith, and with a sense of just sort of shutting ourselves off and refusing to consider or to think more deeply or to explore or to ponder or reflect, and to be sincere about what we perceive and how we understand our own existence. And we hear things of just leave it up to faith, or things are relegated to faith, and it takes up more space than maybe it ought to. And one of the things that the Alter Rebbe really emphasizes here is that the obligation of knowledge is faith picks up where knowledge ends. But that's not to say that we can rest on our laurels and not invest in knowledge. We have to actively learn and reflect on godliness and our relationship with God, and we have to make that a core of our Jewish experience. And only in that space is there room for the dichotomy or the pair of the relationship between knowledge and faith. But it is not a one or the other. It is they work in concert, or maybe in tandem, we could say. So we're going to start chapter 2. Chapter 2 is a little shorter, but it has a lot of concepts that I think we'll talk about and try to understand on the sort of outside of the mimer. So let's get started. Chapter 2 on page 10. We're going to employ a number of Kabbalistic terminologies to help us understand the way in which godliness relates, how the sort of the different ways in which there is God and the world, right? This is a fundamental question and a fundamental topic that Kabbalah and Jewish mysticism, Hasidus, is interested in understanding and is always trying to sort of get to the bottom of, which is you have God infinite, maybe even we could say beyond the dichotomy of infinite and finite. And then we have this finite world, and we have the entire expanse of creation, which all exists within a finite space, right? We have this tradition called Tzimtzum, which was sort of introduced by the Arizal. The Arizal, who is a Kabbalist who lived in the city of Tzfas in the north of Israel in the 1500s, and he really radicalized Kabbalah and Jewish mysticism to the point that Kabbalah is now broken up into, pre and post Arizal. He's the sort of the watershed moment. So he really shifts our understanding and explains a lot in new terminology and teaches this concept of Tzimtzum, that before the creation, there was God, right? Everything was God, and God made a negative space, made this void, this hollow space that in which all godliness was removed, and then he reinserted godliness in a finite form, in a limited expression, and that facilitated the creation of finitude, which is ultimately concludes in the creation of this physical world, right? That's what gives the possibility for there to be finite existence, right? When we think about God as being infinite, so there's no way to transverse or to transition from infinite to finite, right? They're fundamentally at odds with one another. They can't coexist. So you need this quantum leap of Tzimtzum, this radical shift in the paradigm of Tzimtzum, which is this contracting and this reformation that allows for there to be finitude, that allows for there to be limitation. So there's two ways in which we understand godliness being manifest, and one is called Mamalo Kalalman, and the other is called Sevav Kalalman. Mamalo Kalalman means imbues or permeates or fills, and Sovev means encompasses or sort of surrounds. So let's the examples would be that we could relate to on our own personal, if we think of godliness as energy, as vitality, as existence. So mamala, this idea of filling, of imbuing, would be something like food, right? That we consume it, we ingest it, and it sustains us from the inside. Then we have, that's the mamala end of the spectrum. Then the sevav experience would be something like clothes, or it would be that. So it's generally broken up into two. There's makif and sevav are terminologies that are used generally interchangeably. So something like clothes would be something that affects us from the outside, right? When we think about clothes, when we think about how we express ourselves through the clothes that we wear, right? A police officer is wearing clothes, and he's wearing a uniform. We automatically have a sense of him and what he embodies and what he represents before we even talk to him, before we speak to him, right? Immediately, it is just by the clothes that he wears, he represents a certain reality that affects our perception, that changes how he manifests himself. And then there's something, so that would be a close makif harachik, makif hakarev. And then there's makif harachik, the far one, the greater surrounding, which is something like a house, right? Where a house similarly protects a person. The house, a building affects a person in a certain way, in how they, in what the building is, can maybe affect how they operate, how they conduct themselves, but it is not form-fitting. It is not affected by the inhabitants, right? No matter how many people you put in there, assuming it's, to fire code, the building isn't affected at all by who's in there, whether they're, no matter what they're doing in the building. So we have this spectrum of being like tailor-made and being affected by the end user and being totally unaffected by the end user. You have mamala, the imbuing, the permeation, which is ingested, which is limited to each person individually or affected by each person individually, like the food that we eat, right? If you eat food, I'm not sustained by that. I have to eat my own food, right? And then clothes, or a house, which are less affected, if affected at all, by the end user. They just sort of exist on their own. And we're going to work back to these metaphors to understand a little better, but we're going to apply this to knowledge and to faith. So knowledge, knowledge is this permeation deal, right? My knowledge is different than your knowledge. Right? Each one of us has our own individuated experiences when it comes to how we understand, how we comprehend, and how we understand our relationship with God and the world around us. When it comes to Sevev, so because of the knowledge being user-defined and based on our individual experiences, so therefore our perception of God is sort of limited by that, and it becomes, in some ways, we could say, it speaks to even the way in which God relates to the world in a mamala fashion. So the limitations of our understanding, the unique perspective of our understanding touch to or orient us towards the limited expression of godliness, the way it is manifest in mamala, in this user-defined experience. Meaning, what I'm able to perceive and what I train myself to identify is what I'm going to perceive. Like it's sort of a confirmation bias type of deal. Whereas B'chinas Sevev, this encompassing of the worlds, is connected with Ani Avaya Leishanisi, is connected with this verse of that in Malachi that says, I am God, I don't change, or I have not changed. It's connected with a more static understanding or a static perception. Whereas when it comes to knowledge, we're constantly learning and we're constantly developing our perspective to push ourselves to see God in a more sincere or in a more sophisticated way. So in that sense, somehow God is also changing in that regard. Not that we're necessarily affecting God by our knowledge, but that there is an element within our understanding of godliness that also is subject to change, that God has the capacity for change in some way, and through knowledge we're able to identify that. Whereas when it comes to faith, when it comes to the Sevev experience, it is connecting to an element of God that is more static, that is more holistic. Like we say in the morning prayers, you Hashem are the same before the world was created and the same after the world was created, since he is not in the category of beings whose existence is limited to the worlds at all. Right? We can only have direct knowledge and awareness of Hashem as he manifests himself in creating and guiding the world. This level of Hashem's providence is called Mamala Kol Almin, the light that permeates all worlds. This refers to the way that Hashem limits his light in order to create and enliven limited worlds and creature. However, Hashem's real truth is that he's completely beyond the limitations of the worlds and is totally beyond involvement in creating and guiding the worlds. As it says, it is not the main function of Hashem's infinite light to create and give life to the worlds. On this level, Hashem encompasses, so to speak, all worlds, since Hashem is ultimately the true existence of everything, and everything exists only inside of him, as it were. but he is not limited to the parameters of the worlds at all. Regarding this level, it says that Hashem did not change by creating the worlds. On this level, the existence of the worlds affects no change in Hashem. Go ahead.
This analogy that the set forth here, does it also mean to have knowledge be the internal and aspect of God and faith external? Would you mind about that one?
Yes. Yeah. So when it comes to how we understand, let's say it a different way. Our perception is that the world exists and that we exist, and that is the sort of foundation of everything that we perceive, everything that we understand, right? It starts with us. But ultimately, what we're trying to get to is to see past our own existence and to see past the existence of the world, and to see God as the first cause, so to speak, right? As the source of all. And in doing that, what we're able to transcend, what we're able to get past is, instead of seeing God as the creator of the world, recognizing that the world is insignificant in comparison to just how great God is. That when we're able to, if we're defining everything by what we perceive in this world, then God is only as big as we can perceive the creator to be. But if we liberate ourselves from that mentality, then we're able to dial into seeing this world as a limited expression. Like we say in the davening, that it is a ziv and a ha'ara, it is a ray of a ray, right? When we think about light and the brilliance, the illumination that light provides, so the second generation type of light, the second generation, the ray off of a ray, the very limited manifestation of light is how we understand this is all the vitality that this world, all the energy that this world needs. That basically what we're trying to do in a nutshell is shift our consciousness to, instead of defining our relationship with God based on our experience in this physical world, to transcend those limitations and to relate to God almost disconnected from existence, from this physical world. So when we say that you existed before the world was created and you exist after the world was created, we're removing the creation element from our relationship with God. We're freeing ourselves up to being present, to godliness, independent, and to access something within ourselves and our own consciousness that maybe can transcend our finite limitations as well. That's at least the goal. Continuing on page 11, Rak b'chinas malchus v'levadehi malchus kol elamim. Right? It is a disconnected expression. And this is through the metaphor, we understand that through the metaphor of Malchus, of kingship or kingdom. Malchus is one of the 10 spheres, one of the spheres, one of the traits, modalities that are the ways in which we understand godliness to express itself through creating the world. And Malchus we understand and we relate to as speech. So just like when we talk, we can speak rather infinitely, right? We could speak forever, and it is disconnected from who we are. In some sense, it takes on its own existence, right? When I talk, you hear the words and they become thoughts in your experience. They exist for you separate from me, right? Once I've said something, then then you can't unring that bell. And also, the other element in the metaphor of speech is that speech is the tool through which we're able to reveal our thoughts, right? My thoughts that I have are for me alone, and for me to share my thoughts is to speak them out to you, right? But then they go from my thoughts to my speech, and then you hear that speech, and then it becomes a thought by you, right? You think about what I'm saying. So creation, the physical world, the expanse of creation, the expanse of the cosmos is understood to be like speech in how disconnected and how infinitesimal it is relative to Hashem's essence. Dahainu, Bchina Ziv ha'ara mimidas malchusi is baruch k'mayim baruch Shem k'vayid malchusa leilam vod, Shem k'vayid malchusa v'lei malchusa atzma. Right, like we say in the Shema. So we have two experiences, two meditations through saying the Shema. The first is disconnecting ourselves from any type of physical existence, any type of existence at all, any type of limitation. That's why we cover our eyes by the first line of the Shema, to actively reject our physical perspective, our limited perspective, right? To engage instead our spiritual perspective, our capacity to perceive infinity, our capacity to orient towards God as the infinite, indivisible creator, the infinite, indivisible essence that is all, that is singular. That's Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. And then we uncover our eyes and we say Baruch Shem, right? We sort of reacclimate back to the limitations of this physical world. We reorient to say that this world previously manifested as fragmented, but now I see it not as fragmented because I've oriented myself towards the singularity of Hashem Echad, right? I've said God is one, God is singular, God is infinite and indivisible. And once I say that, so now when I uncover my eyes, the world is not fragmented, it's not full of separation, but it is harmonious, right? There's multiplicity to it, but it is unified in its essence. And that's Shem Kavod Malchusei, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchusei. In fact, only a limited ray of his kingship is the source of creation of the kingdom of all worlds. As we say, blessed is the name of his glorious kingship forever, meaning that only the name of his glorious kingship is directly involved with the creation of the world, as opposed to the attribute of kingdom itself, right? Shem Kavod Malchusei means the name of the glory of his kingdom. And we're saying that kingdom is like speech, right? So kingdom we can understand as the process of creation, right? Because we're told that God created the world through speech. God spoke the world into being. So Malchusei is speech, is the act of creation. And we're saying we're not Baruch Malchusei, we're not activating within our consciousness in this lower world. We're not activating we're not dialing into the actual speech that created the world, but we're two generations, two degrees removed from that is Shem Kavod. Meaning to say in a different way, that when we reorient, when we acknowledge the godliness within this world, we emphasize the degree to which we are conscious of it being limited. We're acknowledging how obfuscated the godly reality is in this physical world, and acknowledging or creating awareness to the fact that while this world is an expression of godliness, and while godliness is imbuing all of existence at every moment, it is a tremendously limited expression that facilitates and allows for the physical to conceal any sense of spiritual existence, right? That we can spend 70, 80, 120 years on this planet, and we can perceive each physical thing as just a physical thing, and we can perceive that we can live in a world of evolution and a world of survival of the fittest and a world of a dog eat dog rat race. And we can convince ourselves at every moment without a whole lot of difficulty that what you see is what you get. And the physical existence of this world is the be all and end all. And to say Baruch Shem Kavod Malchusay, to acknowledge, to infuse a God consciousness within that reality, is to recognize that in order, or the fact that that reality is possible, the fact that we can live that reality testifies to how concealed the godliness is in this world and how limited an expression it is. Continuing on page 12. And in this vein, Pirkei Rabbi Elazar says the Mishnah, the Medrash teaches us that before existence, before creation, existed only God and His name, right? Like we say in the Aleinu, we say a similar thing. That creation, the creation has the process of creation facilitates or enables the disconnection, or it puts this space that allows us to see such a limited, to live with such a limited reality of godliness, that it is not even a ray. If we think of God as the luminary, it is not even a ray of the light, but it is a ray of His name. So let's explain that a little further. So we refer to God as Sev Kol Almin, that which surrounds all worlds, that which transcends existence, that transcends all worlds, because the worlds are such a finite, such a limited expression of godliness. When we talk about this world and its existence, so we mentioned that the way in which we understand the source of existence, the way in which we are able to perceive godliness, is we have the metaphor of the body and the soul. And just like we see that the soul enlivens the body, so we can understand that this world has a spiritual source that we call godliness, that we call God. But when we talk about the process of creation, it is insufficient to conceive of that as a body-soul metaphor, because we see in the relationship between the body and the soul that their existences are in some ways intertwined. They're affected by one another, right? So when the body is cold, the soul experiences some discomfort. The Mizracha Magid would say that a small hole in the body creates a big hole in the soul, right? That any ailment that the body experiences, the soul experiences to some degree as well, which means that they're interrelated one another, that they're intertwined. But Hashem, in His relationship with creation, is not affected by the limitations of creation, right? So the fact that there is created the possibility for finitude or the existence of finitude, which is manifest as this physical world, doesn't have any effect on Hashem's essence, like retroactively, so to speak. But rather, hu yizbarech hagam shenimtza lamatik melamayla eini nitmas b'geder mokin chas v'shalom. Right, he's found in this physical world, and he's found in the spiritual realms, and he's found up and down, but he's not contained within space. He's not affected by the limitations. Above and below are equal to him. So when we say that he's surrounding, that he transcends existence, it's not that he is higher than it. It's not that there is any type of directionality, right? We're speaking about spiritual concepts. There's no direction in this sense. Right? This world, this room is totally full of God, right? This room has God just like anywhere else has God. God is everywhere at all times. God is the essence of existence, or the essence that ultimately gives existence, right? You can't say that God is the source of existence in and of himself, because that would itself be too limiting of a statement. But godliness is found everywhere at all times. There's no any spectrum of more godly or less godly is only limited to our perspective. But in an objective sense, God is everywhere. It's all God all the time. So to say Sovev, to say that he's surrounding, that he's transcending, is not to say that he is not present, but rather it's that this physical world doesn't affect in any way godliness. It doesn't change. It doesn't have any bearing on God's essence. And this is why we say that God is Kadesh, right? Kadesh means distinct. Kadesh can mean in some ways, Kadesh we typically translate as holy, right? But it means distinct. It can mean separate in some ways that we think of, right? One of the names that we use colloquially to refer to God is a Kadesh Baruch Hu, which means the distinct one, blessed be he, right? HaKadosh means that he's separated, that he's outside of the realm of creation. Baruch means to draw down, which means to bring him in, right? So we're sort of existing within this opposite, within this paradox where God is beyond, but we're bringing him in at every moment, referring to him as the Holy One, blessed be he. We exist in that simultaneously, but it's not to say, yeah.
Say that recently there's been a challenge to the Big Bang Theory with the Weber telescope they sent up with Weber.
Mhm.
And far deeper, so it's upset the current understanding of the Big Bang Theory of space-time when the universe was created, because they're finding more galaxies beyond the outside of the current understanding.
Mm.
So now it's sort of like almost coincides with Plato's concept that there is no such thing as a beginning or end. It was always existence, always existed.
Mm.
So I don't know how would you interpret that, because physical and spiritual reality so often coincide. Understanding that there was creation is when was the universe created? Was it always here? It was never. It was always present, according to Plato. May coincide with Plato's theory, but Plato didn't have a Weber space telescope with his philosophical point of view.
So we mentioned at the beginning that that the Arizal taught the concept of tzimtzum as being this process in which there was something that preceded the existence of the universe, namely that being God, and time itself is a function of tzimtzum, is a function of the finitude that was created through the creation process. That to begin the creation process, God brought about in some way this concept of negative space. We just mentioned that Hu Shmei Echad, that prior to the existence of the physical world, prior to the creation of existence, let's say, when it was just God and his name, which we understand to be God and the godly energy that is one and the same with God, right? Name is something that is that we use to relate to somebody outside of us, that we use to relate to somebody else, right? If I exist on a desert island, I have no use for a name because there's nobody calling me that name, right? So when we say that God existed with his name, the name is already gives us a hint that there's a sort of a plan for there to be a zulas, for there to be something else, to be another. There was a negative space created that God then reinserted energy into, existence into, at which point time and creation was able to take place. So creation did happen at a certain moment at the beginning of time. And prior to that, there would be no concept of time because there would be no existence. It was just God. Oh, so we say HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So we said Ve'zeh HaKadosh b'Shamayim va'aretz, that God exists. God is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. God is disconnected. God is unaffected by both spiritual and physical realms. That when we say that he is Sovev, that he transcends, it is both the spiritual and the physical. I think oftentimes we have a conception that that there is some type of hierarchy in which the spiritual is more aligned or more sophisticated than the physical, right? That the physical covers over godliness more so than the spiritual. But what we're saying here is that they're both fundamentally limited experiences. And in fact, in some ways, the revolution of Hasidus and what Hasidus brought to the world was that it specifically within the paradox, within the limitation, within the finitude of this physical world, are we able to realize the essentiality of godliness more so than in a spiritual way. That the paradox of existence is that when you hold a mezuzah or when you hold a lulav, you're holding godliness. Because of the way that God imbued himself into the Torah, we're able to, which is his will and his wisdom, and we know that God is unified, is one with his will and his wisdom. So we're able to, in some ways, hold and activate God consciousness through doing mitzvahs, specifically in this physical world, more so than any type of spiritual reflection or exploration. So continuing inside on page 14, because since he is separate, since he is distinct from creation, right? We're saying that distinct from creation means that creation has no effect on God himself, on God's essence. So therefore, the spiritual and the physical both are limited expressions, both are sort of can only allow for so much godly experience, for so much God consciousness, because neither can contain him, neither can relate to his essence. She'enim together alman, because he is not within the parameters of existence, of limited existence of the worlds, right? The worlds is being both spiritual and physical. And the worlds have no effect, cannot change God in any way. Like before the world was created. This is the realm, going back to our question, this is the reality in which we cannot have any knowledge or we cannot have any perception. Because no mind can grasp or understand how it's possible that there is no change to Hashem. Right? We live in a world of cause and effect. Our experience is one in which we live in a reality of consequence. And so for us to conceive in our minds of there being something that transcends that paradox, that transcends that paradigm that is unlimited by cause and effect, is beyond the limitations of our mind. And because it's beyond the limitations of our mind, that's where faith begins to fit in. That's beyond the limitation, that's outside of the realm of knowledge. That our belief is and we'll explore belief in the coming weeks as well. When we talk about faith, and the Hebrew word that we use for faith is being emunah, which has a connotation not only of faith, but also of fidelity, of what we are faithful to, what we are loyal to. Our loyalty, our fidelity lies in believing in Hashem as unchanging, as immutable, as unaffected by creation. Or in the words of King David, like darkness, like light. Beyond the bifurcation or the dichotomy of any type of duality, but rather just static existence, static essence, in some ways beyond our comprehension. So that's where faith fits in. According on page 15, we'll read the last paragraphs and look at the summary. According to the rules of nature in our world, when someone makes something, he is affected by the process. It's not possible for any created being to be truly involved in something and not be affected by it or changed by it at all. Yet Hashem is involved in creating and giving life to the worlds, but at the same time, he is not changed or affected by the process because he exists outside of all the laws of nature and logic that he created, and therefore he does not need to be affected by something if he doesn't want to be. This type of existence is not something that we can understand or even imagine. Since our awareness of this level of Hashem has not changed at all by creating the worlds, it's not something that we can directly understand. We refer to it as belief or faith instead of knowledge, right? So as much as we can, we have a mitzvah, we have an opportunity to expand our consciousness when it comes to what we know and shifting our perspective to see godliness within this physical world. Like we mentioned last week, that the Baal Shem Tov talked about how when we see a leaf rolling down the street, it gives us an opportunity to meditate on godliness manifest in this physical world, and God being infusing the world with sustenance, with vitality. And we have an opportunity to reflect on that and to develop our knowledge, right? Our constant awareness as much as possible, as much as we can. And then we also recognize the limitations of that experience, the limitations of that consciousness, and recognize the limitations of how we're able to understand God in his essence as being unaffected, as being immutable, and beyond the scope of limitation, beyond the scope of dichotomy or bifurcation. And in that sense, that's where faith begins to come in. In the summary, to understand the difference between knowing and belief, we explain two levels of godly expressions, Mamala and Sevav. Mamala, how God limits himself in order to create, give life, and interact with created beings, similar to how the soul enlivens the body. Though we said not entirely because of the limitation of that metaphor and how the soul is affected by the body, which is not something that God experiences. However, there's a second level called Sevav Kol Almin, encompassing all the worlds, or transcending all the worlds, which reflects the true infinite, quote unquote, nature, as it were, the true infinite element of God, that he is not limited to any of the confinements of existence. Even though Hashem is creating the worlds, this process does not affect any change in him or in his unity at all. This is because the worlds are equally encompassed by him. Relative to him, they have no significance. Right? There's a reality in which we recognize that the worlds in and of themselves, existence in and of itself, is totally insignificant to God. And therefore it is specifically through Torah and mitzvahs God, that the vehicle in which God invested himself, that allows us to have a relationship with him. Even though he is present in our world and in all worlds, he is not limited nor affected by any of them at all, since he exists outside of the laws of nature. He exists outside of the finitude of the bounds of existence. He's not defined by any laws or systems that he created. Since this type of existence is something beyond the possible conception of created things, our awareness of this level is called belief or faith, since we cannot relate to it. On our world, I think that was written kind of poorly, that last sentence, but it is called belief because it is something that is beyond our conscious experience. It is something that exists outside. Our mind is programmed or oriented to the limitations of this physical world, and to relate to things the way we perceive them with our physical eyes. And there's only so much that we can extrapolate. There's only so much that we can perceive outside of the bounds of finite existence. And this is where faith comes in. This is where we learn to practice the art of faith and of belief, to incorporate and to orient ourselves, to understand, to not understand, but to have a glimpse into just how infinite, just how boundless God is, God's essence is, and allow that to infuse. What we're going to get to ultimately is to see the interplay between faith and knowledge, and that the more we engage our knowledge, the more we're able to engage our faith, and the more they're able to communicate, the more they're able to affect one another, to enrich our Judaism and our Jewish experience entirely, and also, as always, to that it should carry over and it should affect how we treat each other as well. Being that each person is a tzelem elikim, each person is an expression of godliness. The more we're able to perceive, the more real and sophisticated we make our understanding and our perception of godliness in this world, the more we're able to see it in each other as well. The more we're motivated and committed to positivity and sharing positivity and making this world more godly. And that's why, to bring this back to the beginning, that's why the Arizal, who was really in a lot of ways the father of all of these concepts, certainly Tzimtzum, emphasized that when we begin davening, when we begin prayer in the morning, it's always with the intention of, obviously, Yisrael, the intention of loving our fellow, of embodying love and committing ourselves to acts of service, that as much as our spiritual pursuits orient us towards godliness, it always has to be manifest in how we treat each other as well, and how we relate to each other and the world around us. So that's chapter 2. I know it was sort of out there, but I hope some of that trickled in. And thank you all for joining, and God willing, we'll see you all next week. Go ahead.
Well, he does not need to be affected by anything if he doesn't want to be. Do we conceive situations where he might want to?
I can't. The only thing that really comes to mind is that the Torah and mitzvahs, Torah and mitzvahs aren't a